I can kick it off. You know, and so that's Vanja. He's the CTO of Airbnb for homes. He could tell you more about himself as soon as he starts talking, if he'd like, or else we could just go. I'm going to moderate our fireside chat. So we have some questions that we had decided were great to kick things off. And then we'll see where the discussion goes. And then if you guys have questions, you can either raise your hand, write something in the chat, unmute yourself. I mean, I think there's few enough of us that if we, you know, if we have a break and you want to jump in, please feel free. I'm going to actually start things off by sharing my screen here. All right. So one of the things that I've actually thought has been interesting recently. So there was an article that exemplifies this phenomenon in the Wall Street Journal a couple months back, but there's another set of articles in The Economist that say this, and I've seen it elsewhere as well, right? And so Mims, who was the author of this Wall Street Journal article, pointed out that businesses are furloughing data scientists and complaining that they can't find uses for AI. And in that article, he was focusing largely on predictive analytics as AI. He called that out specifically. But of course, you know, things are broader than that. And so I guess my starting question is, you know, well, real estate is historically not had much impact from data science, present companies excluded. And is this just because there just are not very many uses for data science in the real estate industry? I thought we might go around the room and just see about, can we at least start out with listing out broadly? We talked deeply kind of in the, you know, in the first half of the tutorial, think broadly about the different possible use cases or wish lists or applications of data science within real estate for from each of the perspectives of each of our different companies. How do we start with, it's not quite the order I have here because I have some lists that you guys gave me, but maybe Airbnb can start it off.
All right, but you need to be a little bit more precise because that's two of us here, right?
Yeah, you guys get to, I'm not going to pick. You guys get to...
You go ahead. We haven't heard from you yet, Vanja.
All right, yeah. So I think, you know, in the larger scope of things, if data is created and captured, you have always use for data science and machine learning. And traditionally, I think when you look at the explosion of data in the world with the web in the 90s, the data that it's easy to deal with, it's a lot of data. There was a problem with dealing with a lot of data in the prior decades. We don't have that problem anymore. It's a lot of data. It's a data on similar things. The real estate data, I think it's a little bit more difficult data because there's less of it. You don't buy a house every day. And also, the data is heterogeneous. It's about the units of reasoning are very different. So I feel that in terms of data science application, there are many. And I think Ali, maybe you can give a little bit of the things that we're working at Airbnb. But the meta point here is that I feel that some of the problems that I wasn't interviewed for the article, and that's too bad. Maybe I would have given a contrarian opinion there. But some of the problems we see here is that the real estate data science requires non-traditional and honestly more advanced and more sophisticated methods. And people who are capable of doing that type of thing might be far and in between, I think. And while the article is probably referring to the run-of-the-mill kind of stuff that other companies are doing, more in line with what's done in the ads world, maybe. That will be my somewhat controversial, maybe.
All right, let's come back to that. Let's because you and I probably will be in somewhat agreement on our contrarian view there. So, but Ali, we have a big list. Do you want to talk a little about the breadth of?
Yeah.
I mean, the list is so long. I have to scroll it so that they can see all the different. And I'm sure you just stopped at 36 because.
That's right. That's right. I could go on forever. I think maybe one lens that might be interesting is actually like COVID. So one thing that for me was really obvious when COVID hit is just how many applications there are of data science and how many more there are. For example, maybe another lens is also how, for example, Airbnb hires data scientists is through kind of 3 tracks. It's called analytics, inference, and algorithms. And when I think of when COVID hit, there were so many analytics needs, right? It's like, okay, what happened to cancellations? They're suddenly spiking. What are they going to look like in the future? Should we measure them on the day the cancellation happens or the day of the night of the cancellation? So many trends that we needed to understand. Then on the inference side, we rolled out a lot of things globally. For example, the Superhost Relief Fund to help hosts. These were not things that could be easy A/B tests, right? These are things you need to have, sophisticated quasi-experimental methods like some of the ones that I introduced earlier to measure. And then kind of third, on the algorithms lens, a lot of things have changed dramatically. So thinking of search, people search very differently now than they did before COVID. And we really have to take a, clean look at our models and either, adjust the training window, make it shorter, reweight. So it's not like things that we just built and we can just leave them. So that's just one example of like kind of the breadth that I saw just within the last few months.
How do they search differently?
How do they search differently? So people are very interested in flexibility right now, right? You don't exactly know what's going to happen. So that's one example. Vanja is more of an expert on search than me, but that's one that stands out.
Yeah, I mean, look, in general, I think the Airbnb search problem is very different than the search problem you see in other places. I'm sure in real estate, search problem is even very different as well. I think in times like this, people sometimes search for a place within a driving distance without knowing the precise location and even dates sometimes, or they search for a longer term stays where the precise date does not matter, and minus week or two, could be accommodated for the right type of place. So you see the difference in these patterns, and you see how people issue these queries one after another. And so what we do, we detect that and then adjust our product and our algorithms to help them achieve their goal in less queries.
So Ron, you had given me a list as well. Do you want to talk a little about the breadth? I mean, you talked about a few problems in your.
Yes, totally. So do you guys hear me? I switched the device here. Yeah, so like probably one thing that I wanted to mention is about this article, like coming kind of back to that question, why it looks like AI is not needed in real estate. So in commercial real estate, the world is actually kind of very, very different from the consumer side. So there are few companies that are investing a lot of money, talking about like, they need to build a fund of like $1 billion to buy a portfolio of a few buildings. And those are very opinionated people. They're like, we know what's going on. And like no one will tell us because we have been there, we have looked, we've been doing that for decades, if not hundreds of years. And I'm not really exaggerating because this business goes from in generations. So they think they know exactly what is going on. And nowadays with COVID, it's actually changing. Those big organizations are getting out of the sudden scared that things are changing and they don't understand really how it's changing. An office space in Midtown Manhattan would be a very, very safe investment half a year ago. Nowadays, many of those buildings are standing empty, right? So like all this is becoming a big shock to the industry, and everyone is trying to get as much data as possible right now to understand like what will happen with us. So that's why the industry is getting data driven pretty much as we speak. And the list that I have here is definitely like by no means a comprehensive list. It's just things that we are dealing with at Cherre, we are focused on, and I think those are very important questions that we need to answer even before we get into something deeper than that. So like data cleaning, data standardization, entity resolution is something that is like the basics, right? And if we don't do it correct, then like we can't just really build models. It's just totally impossible. Garbage in, garbage out, right? So that's why I came up with a fairly short list, but a very focused list on the immediate needs of the commercial real estate market.
Cool. So I have a list too, but since you guys actually liked one part of the question better than the other, let's keep talking about this question about why. So there's these sort of two pieces. One is it can't find applications, right? And the other is for data science, and the other is they're not finding utility out of their data scientists. Of course, those are overlapping questions. Vanja was suggesting maybe they're getting run-of-the-mill data scientists and not whatever the opposite of that is, really good data scientists, maybe, right? And let me actually offer a second perspective of that, which is maybe they're bringing in people who are too specialized, right? And so on one hand, you could have data scientists who can do basic stuff, but actually can't do the sophisticated stuff that we need to do in real estate if we're thinking of ourselves as more complicated. I mean, I happen to agree with Vanja. I mean, I did a lot of work in online ads. I also worked for the phone company and did telecom. I've done data science for the banking industry, you know, and so on. Real estate is, I mean, there are a lot of challenges that you don't see, but some of those other traditional industries also have more challenging problems than you see online. I think the online, this online view, right, especially with ads, gives us a false sense of how easy it is, a false sense of how easy it is to do data science, and because of some of the things that were that have been mentioned, like, you know, well, you have all these actors, they're all sitting there in your online system. You have actions that actually can be taken by the system. You have outcomes that can be observed. You don't have to wait a year to see whether or not the house sells or not. You get an outcome right away. And something I think that is really key, which Vanja might have mentioned. So what are the costs and benefits involved with showing an ad or running just about any like online experiment that you read about it at KDD? Let's say 90% of them. Those are, you know, right? The costs and benefits are so small for any individual action, right, that you don't really have a problem if you have the same kind of problem that you make a mistake. If we go to not just to the area that I talked about, let's say the area that Ron talked about, right? You make a mistake by spending $100 million, $200 million on a business, on a building, right? That's a big deal. And so I think all of these things kind of come together to sort of make some of the problems more challenging, right? But again, that doesn't mean the lists that you guys showed me, I unshared so that we could see us, but I'm gonna share again briefly just to illustrate, right? A lot of what we do at Compass, right? It isn't have a data science solution to the problem. You're doing lots and lots and lots of different data science stuff under the hood, and then there may be a solution to the problem that is an engineered solution or a human solution or whatever that combines parts of that data science. Let me actually show my, oh, go ahead, Vanja, I think.
Yeah, what I was going to say is just, when I look at the list, what strikes me, obviously the Airbnb list is a little bit longer, but, if you look at this list, how many data scientists do you have per problem? Because if you have and how many people do you actually need to solve any of this problem to a reasonable, like, first cut solution? This will require data science teams of hundreds of people just to do justice to what we've shown on the screen here. And there's a lot more. And I think Cherre's list a little bit smaller because maybe the company is smaller as well, right? But
that's right.
This just shows that it's the opposite is true in terms of, not being able to make use of the people that we have, because we obviously have, in some cases, more problems than people, right?
What's also interesting about the article, which I read after you sent it this morning, is that it sort of talks about AI being potentially a bit overblown, and then it points to layoffs of data scientists as evidence, but it also states that the layoffs in data science are drop in the bucket compared to other industries. So I feel like you could take those same facts and write a very different article, which is like, oh, AI is still growing like crazy. We are now more aware of some of the risks, like GDPR. We know that interpretability of models is important. Instead of just going deep in AI, we're also going broader and thinking about causal and interpretability. And wow, if you look at recent layoffs, historic layoffs, data science was much less affected. That would be similar facts, different article.
Yeah. Right, and then to me, this idea that the companies are not finding places to use, predictive analytics, data science, AI, whatever we want to call it. Again, I also did 3 dozen, and that was just because after you do 3 dozen, you don't actually want to try to think up any, you don't want to try to find any more. But to me, let's actually move on to the next question. So if you have 3 dozen possibilities, and as Vanja said, I mean, each one of those needs multiple data scientists. Let's face it. Right. And by the way, one of the dirty secrets is that once you deploy it, you need even more data scientists, because guess what? It doesn't always, like never maybe works exactly the way you think it's going to work. And now it's in production and you got to be able to respond really fast to things. So, right. So if in fact we need hundreds of data scientists, if we want to do all this stuff and we don't have them, then we have to pick and choose. And I think an awful lot of companies, right? They aren't. I mean, Airbnb is even pretty mature with respect to data science, as compared to other companies in real estate and other companies beyond. I don't think the discussion is really limited to real estate. So it's rare to have such an experienced group of data scientists together. Heads of data science, two CTOs, right? And so. Something that I have not read about in a machine learning or data science book. I've never seen it in a class besides my own, of course. I do teach this, but most of you can't come and take my class. How in the world do you choose then? You each, you've listed dozens of, and I have listed dozens of possible applications. I don't have hundreds of data scientists. You might, but I don't, right? How do we go about choosing which of these to work on, right? Isn't this like one of the most important things for data scientists to be able to do? My one interpretation of that article is they didn't find things that had impact to work on. Maybe it's because they picked the wrong things to work on. They also had dozens of ideas and they had to pick one. They went and they picked it and it was a stupid one to pick.
All right, Ali, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is something I think about a lot, and generally we think about a lot. I sort of separate it out into 2 buckets of work. There's the table stakes. There's like foundational work that everything else is built on top of and it just needs to get done. And then for everything else, I would take basically like a return on investment lens, right? Like what's the expected incremental impact? What's the incremental cost, whether it's dollars if we're doing some incentives, or whether it's headcount. But then also, what's the risk? Big bets might have a high impact, but they also have there's a lot of large variance around it. And then you kind of want to make sure that you have a mix of these big boulders and pebbles. And boulders will have higher expected impact, but they're also going to, as I said, come with more variance. So I think an example of a big boulder that we on the data science team at some point decided to invest in is the one I talked about earlier, which was the future incremental value system. That's something that beforehand it was risky, right? Will it work? If we put this together and build the feature set, will it cover multiple applications, or will we just need bespoke models? And then even if it works, will teams adopt it, or will they just continue to use their own solutions? And the key there is, how can you de-risk a little bit? The same way you do in product development, how can you first build some kind of prototype before you go to the full-blown solution?
Ron, you want to?
Yeah, so we are a startup, obviously. And as a startup, we need to be very picky about what problems we're solving. So the resources are sparse just because we're a startup. We are past round A. We're a fairly big company, about 50 people, but still, it's a very difficult question to choose the right data science project to work on. And we're applying a very simple approach to that. We are just not going to do anything but things that our customers need. So if we see that a customer is asking something, and our customers are usually big organizations, they know what they're asking. And if we see those asks being repeated by other customers, yeah, this is the project that we will do, because we're seeing an immediate, revenue out of it. If it's not something that our customers need, we'll just push it to the, next quarter or next year or something like that. So, for example, there are things that our customers need and they're not getting anywhere. So Cherre is in the data integration space, right? So our customers are saying, we want access to this data feed and this data feed and this data feed, and we are aggregating all those data feeds together in one clean format. And one of the asks was like, do you guys have unmasked owners? Do you actually know who are those big organizations behind those really big landmark buildings? And we are like, there are no partners who can provide this data, but we are aggregating their data together so we can build a system that would provide this information. So like, if there is no partner who can provide this information, of course we will build it ourselves.
Vanja.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, honestly, I've worked in companies, small and big, and I've seen resource constraint everywhere. It's amazing. You even go in a place like Google, and we're still like nickel and diming headcount, one or two people here and there deciding what to work. So I think somehow, and that's maybe a topic for another panel, of how come that you scale as company, you always end up kind of dealing with very similar issues you would thought will be resolved forever, right? I think, going back, there is the return on investment, and obviously if something's easy, we do it. There is also the things that work specifically for the domain. And what strikes me with the future incremental value, and the way I learned about that from Ali and the team, is that when I came in at Airbnb about a little bit over a year ago, I did not understand the domain. And I had honestly underestimated the complexity of the domain in terms of data science. And future incremental value is a very interesting thing, because it's like in the ads world, you have something called attribution. That means, given that you have seen an ad, what's the likelihood of performing certain action that's favorable for the company? So buying things and so on. So it's like you can make this arbitrarily complex. It's like, what is the amount of money you're going to spend on, with this particular company? Now, attribution in the ad world is a mixture of data science, data collection, and black magic. And honestly, some self-promotion by companies like Facebook will tell you, look, we exactly know, what's going to happen if you show ads with us. So now, if you really look from scientific point of view, that you could be convinced or not, right? So because the world is really, really complicated. The same thing, it's even more maybe in some ways in Airbnb with providing temporary accommodations. But future incremental value is one of these projects that actually I think makes a lot more sense for Airbnb than to some extent some of these attribution methods would make for even for some of the ad world, right? And because the number of people coming in and the way that how people behave in sequences and so on makes it viable for us to have a workable prediction. And so the question is here, this is a very, very important project. It's like, how do you fund it or you're not? You have to understand the details and understand the right level of what's feasible and what's not, and divest maybe from some of the opinions you have about similar problems in other domains, because that clouds you. In the beginning, you're like, well, this is hard. This is well, maybe not. So this type of epiphanies, at least I had when coming into this domain, which makes it fun to work here, but also made me pause a little bit and made me maybe stop passing judgments as quickly as I was used to while living in the ads world for 15 years, where you accumulate all this intuition of what could or would work versus what not. And I feel that's as a leaders in this space, that's one of the key things, is to assess these things. And look, between the four of us here, this type of judgments of what would work and what not between the three different companies could be very different. Although we're having this panel together, our domains and the particular particularities of the data are probably very, very different. So that's a little bit of a more philosophical answer.
I think you're absolutely right. And I want to go back because kind of the way I think of it actually combines a lot of what you guys have already said, and I'm not going to repeat it again. I want to actually pull out this notion of ROI because, of course, we can kind of think. I'll put like a caricature, right? Of course, that's exactly what we would want to do, like estimate the ROI. Isn't that what we ought to do with every project? And it, as all the data scientists probably know, but let's just lay it out carefully, right? It turns out estimating the ROI, sort of estimating in advance the ROI from a data science project is very different from other projects, and it's different for a particular reason, right? We really have to estimate expected ROI, not just ROI. There are at least three kinds of uncertainty that we have to deal with, two of which you see a lot in other projects and one of which you don't, right? You have product uncertainty, right? Is it actually going to be a product that the customers are going to love? That happens everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So of course there are differences with every product, but that's not something unique to data science problems. Like there's engineering uncertainty. Are we actually going to be able to build it with the resources we think we're going to be able to build it with, right? Again, that happens with every project. I don't think that's particularly, it might be that our team has no experience building like fancy machine learning systems. Okay, maybe it's slightly higher, but it's no different from if you basically have some new, when Hadoop came around for the first time back, 15 years ago, and like people were like, well, we need to use this. Yeah, there was hell of a lot of uncertainty in engineering in engineering then, right? The third kind of uncertainty is different, right? It's kind of like science uncertainty, right? It's basically, can you even do that in the first place, right? It's not product. I'm not saying if you could do it, would somebody buy it or use it or whatever, or would it give value? No, this is can you even do it? The first projects that I worked on were for the phone company, right? Some of those were things that we had seen people in other, like fraud detection. I did a lot of work on fraud detection back in the 90s, right? You had seen other people do that. So you kind of had this feeling like you could probably do it because they had done it in credit cards. Wasn't all that much work when I did it in telecom, but yeah, it's kind of like the same. by the way, that's a terrible way to think about it, but that's the way I thought about it. So there's this science uncertainty, and Ali already talked about how we deal with that, right? We actually have to have this, we take the same kind of ideas that we do when we have product uncertainty and kind of apply them over on the science side. And it's exactly what researchers do anyway, And by the way, we see humongous data science failures, like the IBM MD Anderson $50 million debacle. I don't know if you guys know about that. Go search on the web. It's not really relevant to this tutorial. But they lost $50 million, and MIT finally did a retrospective of it. This is a healthcare thing where IBM was claiming this is the future of our company, right? And then, and it came down to, we don't have labels for the training data. Like, you didn't figure that out after $1 million? I mean, it took you $50 million to figure that one out, right? And I'm caricaturing that one too, right? Go read the MIT Tech Review article on it. It's a very good article, right? But this is kind of the idea, is you have this uncertainty. How do you actually reduce that uncertainty for the lowest investment possible, and then remake your decision on what your expected ROI is going to be, right? And so, I think that's kind of one of the keys. And so if we go through the lists, we could ask ourselves, do we think we could do those things, right? And so on. Oh, there's another thing that I think didn't come up yet, and that is estimating the value, right? So the other part of the expected ROI is like value given success. So let's just say we could do that, right? Can we estimate the value? And I wanted to bring up something about this isn't, again, unique to data science projects, but I'd like to hear your opinion on it, right? In my experience, a lot of times, much of the value that you're getting from the data science investments is actually option value, right? You build some models. They're not only useful for that problem that you're working on, but you could then apply them to a bunch of other things. You get the data in order. It's a big investment the first time you get the data in order. Once it's in order, you can apply it to a bunch of other things, right? Your data scientists learn the domain better. They learn the data better. Like, there's all this optionality you're investing in, right? And some projects have much higher option value than others, right? And so you guys actually kind of explicitly take this into account when you're picking projects, and this one might have less direct value, but a lot more option value. And so therefore we're gonna sort of put a bunch of investment in that.
I have to smile because I remember sitting in a meeting with Vanja, and Vanja asked, what's the future incremental value of the future incremental value?
Exactly. Good.
Should I jump in?
Yeah, sure, please.
Yeah, so obviously, as data scientists, we talk a lot with engineering teams. And for them, all those questions are so much not trivial. I mean, like, the first thing that they ask me usually when I'm talking about a new project, they're like, okay, when is it going to be ready? How much time it will take you to build it? And I'm like, if it works. So like, to them, you build a project, you have like a timeline, you start, you do it, you build it. In our domain is like, we need to figure out what is working, how is it working, and they don't think in that terms. So it's a constant clash between data science and engineering, because for engineering, everything has to be, planned and measured. For us, there is so much uncertainty that you talked about that, like, before we come up with something, we really need to play with it. And the trouble is that when the conversation goes directly between data science and data engineering, there is like a gap in understanding. So whatever I'm trying to explain, the engineers just don't get. They're like, okay, when is the deadline? When are you doing it? So the right approach for solving that is actually involving the management. Like in our case, that's the CEO. We're actually sitting in all those meetings, and he's watching the dynamics. Like when I'm trying to explain to the engineering guys, we need to research this. Like, it's not that like there is a lot of uncertainty in the project like that, and they stop understanding me. then the person on top is connecting all this together and saying, yes, like data science is just thinking differently, engineering is thinking differently. Why don't we find a way to combine it together such that it's going to be a mutual benefit both for engineering and product and data science and the entire company. So this dynamics is very interesting. And I'm very lucky to be in a company when it's happening exactly to everyone's benefit. I'm pretty sure other companies might suffer in this domain.
So data science is I mean, maybe the name has some alignment here. Is much more like R&D than it is like sort of traditional engineering, especially in the early stages. The company that Compass bought, my company, mine and Panos's and Josh's company that Compass bought. One of our lines of work was actually advising stakeholders on their data science strategy, getting things in order, picking the right project, stuff like that, right? And one of the things that I learned very early on was, even though data science is much more like R&D, keep your mouth shut about it, because as soon as you mention research or R&D or whatever, most of those stakeholders are like, they had some bad experience with R&D or research at some point, right? And they're like, yeah, get the hell out of here if that's what you're talking about, that R&D stuff, right? And so I think we need to talk about the characteristics of those problems, rather than talk about as, oh, we have to do the research first, right? Then it seems like you're going to go off and write some KDD papers or something, and never come back with anything useful.
Yeah, I mean, I would turn this around on you, Foster. Since although you're the moderator, but let's turn this around on you a little bit. As a recovering researcher myself, you're still a researcher, right? I mean, you're still at academic institution, but I've shedded away that part of my professional persona. So as a recovering researcher, when do you think, and how would you advise those companies when R&D is actually appropriate? Like, when do you push the envelope out versus you stay in the comfort zone? And how do you balance that thing?
Right. I mean, so
very selfishly, because we have this problem with Airbnb too, So.
Right. And, I mean, people maybe don't know, I've also established, sort of been the data science founder for several other startups that, where we had to deal with these questions. And I think different companies deal with them differently. And so it has to do a lot with strategy. And so let me talk a little about that. So I think when it comes to data science, we could take companies and put them into three buckets where the strategic issues with respect to data science differ in the three different buckets, right? The first one, let's call them type A companies. From a data science perspective, type A companies. Those are companies for which the data science is like their fundamental raison d'etre, right? They would not exist without the data science, right? The company that I helped to found, Distillery, which is an online advertising company. It does machine learning based audience creation, targeting, stuff like that. Without data science, it wouldn't exist. That's just, same with another company that I helped to found, Integral Ad Science. Integral Ad Science, again, it's fundamentally based upon doing data science and then making products based on data science and so on, right? So that's for category A. Category C are companies where data science really has nothing to do with their strategy, right? So when I worked for the phone company, I worked for what's now Verizon. Look, they're going to be delivering telephone service, wireless service, television service, whether or not they have any data science, right? It's a very different situation there. Then you still have to think about what's the strategy of the company, right? And then align the data science with what the strategy of the company is. So if the company is trying to be the low cost provider, then you should be applying your data science towards, I'll get the question, but I think this carving up is important. You apply your data science towards reducing costs. If you want to be the best customer service and charge a premium for it, then you apply your data science to improving your customer service. Whatever the strategy of the company is, you want your data science strategy to be aligned. And then in between those two are companies, let me think, Airbnb, I believe, would be one of these companies. It's a company for which the data science actually isn't necessary as a fundamental thing. You could still match, let's just say you can build a tech solution to match homeowners who want to rent out their properties with guests without substantial data science, right? But you're thinking that you're competing based on data science, right? The data science is part of your strategy to compete. And so Amazon in retail would have clearly been a company like this. Airbnb, I think, and I think Compass is also in this realm. Cherre might actually be in the first class, where the data science is it's part of the fundamental reason for being. Like, we're a brokerage, right? We want to compete based upon our, on our tech platform, and then the data science as being a fundamental part of competition, right? Okay, so where does when do you want to do R&D? This is very different. Probably if in category C, you're probably not going to be doing much R&D at all. You're applying this stuff. You may be getting consultants. You have data science. Are they going out of their way to sort of research stuff, not beyond the R&D that's just necessary to do the stuff we talked about before? See whether the stuff is going to work for the application. See whether we can build something that's going to be an option to do other things in the future, right? Type A companies, my view is they want to start doing R&D from the beginning, right? They want to, this is everything that they're basing the company on. They want to do as much research on that stuff as they can. Like Distillery, I'll bet you we published more KDD papers per employee in the company of any company ever.
Wow.
I'll make that bet. We published more KDD papers per company, per employee than any company ever, right? Why? Well, because this is our fundamental reason for being. You go to Google and we wanted them to say, yeah, that's one of the smartest companies around. And when it comes to data science, yeah, bring them in and talk to them. Whether we're going to buy from them is a different story, but bring them in, we want to talk to them, right? And then in the middle, if you're going to be competing, if you're going to be Airbnb and you're going to be competing on this stuff, I think you choose those bets wisely. Where is some research that's really aligned with your fundamental strategy? Yeah, and go off and, I want to, like for instance, we're writing these, for people who joined late, right? We have a blog series that we've just started. It's, you can go to something like AI at Compass or something like that, but it's on Medium, you'll find it, follow it. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna be publishing, we start off with the AI at the product level, and then try to make these bite-sized pieces and have pieces that go deeper and deeper into the science, right? Because we're not ready to be writing scientific papers. We're kind of too early to be doing that, right? But we still want to be kind of talking about our research, right? Because this is because we're in that middle crew. So I think it's, yeah, when you start to actually believe that this is kind of a fundamental thing we're going to compete on, then you want to start doing R&D on it and basically make sure you know more than anybody in the world about it. Not just we can figure out how the product works.
It's also an interesting, not to go too much on a tangent, but there's also an interesting org design question at that point, right? Like, it's interesting to see how different companies solve the R&D question. Does it happen embedded in the individual teams that are thinking about that specific topic, say pricing? Or do you pull out the people who go deeper and think more longer term about and publish more papers into its own team? And you see a lot of different companies, choose different paths there.
Yeah, I have opinion on that, but I probably have opinion on everything. I mean, I've seen both of the extremes fail. At one extreme, you have this over-the-wall thing where you have these scientists and they write papers, and then somehow or other their stuff is supposed to actually have an impact in practice. And if you have a heroic person who really wants to have an impact in practice, it can work. But it's just not, I haven't seen it sort of systematically work. And then the other side, you have complete embedding, and that doesn't work either, because guess what? The fires to fight, there's always fires to fight. It's this, you can always put off the stuff you need to do to get a paper written, right? And so papers just don't get written. The research just doesn't get done well, and so you have to find some middle ground where the people are still embedded, yet, however you manage it is another story. But let's just say, yeah, half your sprint time is actually spent on doing the science, and you're going to be actually incentivized and evaluated based on it. It's not like something you could put aside, because then you won't be actually doing your job, right? So something in the middle there is, to me, is what seems to work. And just a lot of celebration and incentivizing of the stuff that you actually want to see happening, which is just, I guess, management 101 kind of stuff. Vanja, what do you say about that?
I think as one of my early managers when I was at IBM Research, for that matter, a long time back, he always says this different ways you can skin a cat, right? So it's an old saying in the West, I guess. And I think you can, you know, the research model question is a forum of itself, but you know, you need to make sure your incentives are aligned correctly, because I've seen this, for example, in IBM Research. It was, you know, funding model was at some point you do whatever you want, and then the funding model was, no, you have to get some funding from the product teams, and I've seen how neither worked or both helped solve something, and then the moment you change the system, people just find a way to do what they need to do. Which brings me to the other point that I'm a little bit pivoting maybe the conversation, Foster. I think one of the things with the real estate domain per se is how much economics it has in it. And, you know, this is where people like Alec come in. You know, I think we at Airbnb, we probably have a top tier economics department in terms of, you know, how many people with economics background we have. And I feel that I work with top tier economists on the ad side as well. But again, there, a click on an ad is so inconsequential in the overall scheme of life that economics is a lot less prominent. And I think some of the mistakes we made in the early days at Yahoo and Google was that we didn't take economics in account, and then we messed up things. Because the problem with economics is you mess it up, you figure out 2 years from now when it's too late, right? And so I wanted to see, Ali, maybe hear from you and then hear from both of you as well. It's like, what's kind of the coupling here of economics and data science, which I think is very unique for this domain?
So before Ali comes in, I just want to make a clarification, because I think I brought this up before. So I just want to clarify, right? The individual decisions in advertising have much lower costs and benefits. Right. But there's a billion of them a day for this company and a billion of them a day for that company. And so what it allows you to do is run experiments at scale.
Yes. Yes. And reason
it's not really that the decisions are overall low value. It's like individual decisions are low value, and that allows you to do different things. Okay.
Yeah. So the bucket, you reason on some bucket level, but you know, and somehow things a lot more similar at that granularity. All right, Ali.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So with respect to economics, I think where it can be very helpful is when you're thinking about how to design a marketplace, right? You don't have a large training data necessarily to go back on with lots of counterfactual worlds of how to design. So take something like Airbnb. One of the things we think about is like our cancellation policies. We can't look at thousands and thousands of companies' histories who tried different cancellation policies and see what happened, right? So you kind of have to a certain extent, use some economic theory. Like if you give more flexibility, people will probably book more, they'll probably cancel more. There might be an inventory holding problem. You want to think through all of those before when you're designing your marketplace. And once you have designed it, I think that's when you're optimizing your marketplace. That's when I think ML AI is particularly useful, right? So going back to the cancellation policy example, you could imagine showing different cancellation policies to different guests or different hosts. But it's hard to start out the problem or problems like that with pure prediction methodology.
Ron?
For Cherre, it's still different, but very kind of interesting. Our customers are economists. Like when they want to invest like $200 million in a portfolio of buildings, they actually operate in all these economics toolkit that is built to make this type of a decision, because I'm pretty sure that, like, if you give me $200 million to invest, my hands will be shaking. Like, it's not an easy decision to make. So we, as a data company, we are talking a different language. We are talking the language of, like, why don't we take data, we merge it, we'll build a model, we'll let the data talk. They are speaking in terms of macroeconomics, microeconomics, and how do you analyze whatever you have in order to make the decision. So that's definitely a disconnect between whatever we used to build, because, you know, we've been building products for decades on the data science side in different other industries, and the market that is actually looking for something else. It really looks like it's looking for something else. So this is not a trivial problem to solve, but the markets are kind of coming closer to each other. So those investors who've been thinking about, like, you know, macroeconomic factors that affect their decisions, out of the sudden they understand that there is a layer of big data that they haven't touched because they thought that it's not what they need. Out of the sudden, they look at others who are already using technology like that and getting better investments, and they're like, wow, we need to do something about it. So they are willing to speak to us our language. The question is whether we are willing to speak to them their language. And to do that, we actually need to have a lot of domain knowledge. We actually really need to understand real estate to speak to them. This is not trivial for us because all of us are coming from other domains, and we learned them, we forgot them, we probably relearned them and stuff like that. Real estate is fairly new for pretty much all of us. And before we learn that domain, before we understand why they're doing it as they're doing it, it's going to be hard for us to actually, like, you know, reduce this gap to total minimum.
So we should all take Foster's class here, right?
Totally.
So, yeah, I mean, at Compass, we actually have yet another, because, you know, Airbnb has created a new market and a new kind of, you know, a new kind of market. I mean, yeah, and Cherre is actually serving a particular, you know, a particular market, and Compass actually is serving an extremely complicated market, right? When we think about, oh, you know, so I mean, I think of, like, when people talk, I'm gonna bring in something that Ali was talking about before, right? When people talk about Facebook as a two-sided market, no, it's not, right? Facebook is a retailer. Facebook invests in merchandise, which is the people who are on Facebook, and it sells them to, it is exactly Walmart for people's attention. It's not a two-sided market. There's not people who are looking for ads, and then they're going to pay for it if only they can find the right company to advertise to them, right? It's not a two-sided market, right? It's just Amazon, you know, for not Amazon Marketplace, which is a two-sided market, Amazon, you know, selling something to someone who wants to pay for it. And then they have the inventory problem with their inventory is keeping their people on Facebook, and they're keeping the attention on there, right? Okay.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, we have our two-sided markets, right, where we have Uber and, like, the ones that Ali was talking about, Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and others as well. Amazon Marketplace, there's others as well, right? Think about actually the market that Compass is playing in. Is it a two-sided market? No. Is it a three-sided? It's more than that. Is it a three-sided market? No, it's actually more than that, right? What are the sides? Well, of course, you think they're the buyers and the sellers of homes. Okay, but there's also prospective buyers and sellers, right? And let's forget about prospective buyers, because it's interesting. It's hard to tell the difference between a prospective buyer and a buyer, so we'll just call them a buyer, all right? But a seller changes completely once they list their home. Everything about what their economic setup is changes when they list the home, right? And before that, by and large, they're in the market for an agent, right? And so there's a matching problem of matching agents to prospective sellers, right? right? And so you have agents, you have prospective sellers. Then once the actually agent and the seller get together, it's a different entity. This is actually a seller with a listed home, a seller in the market. Right? Now you have the problem of matching a seller to a buyer, right? And then of course on the buyer side, you still have people who the agents think are buyers, but they're not, they're tourists. You know, there's plenty of people, and not anymore, but there's plenty of people who go to open houses as a hobby and love to chat with agents about things, right? You know, who aren't really serious buyers, right? You know, and so forth. We can actually expand this out. So it's this really complicated market. And the nice thing is, from the point of view of the original question, like, do you need these? We don't need economists to help us design that. That's just there. We may need economic thinking to help us understand it. We may want to have economics on staff to help us understand it. At some point, we may want to change the dynamics of it. So we would need economists for that. But at a first stage, we are in the game of how do we make our agents the most productive agents in the world, in the country, we're only a national right now, given that market.
So let me challenge you, not on the company, on Compass as a company. I think Compass as a company is doing probably the right thing here, but a little bit wider in the real estate market. The economic model that I see in the real estate market is extremely conservative model, simply because the goods are so expensive, right? But you could potentially design a completely different economic models of ownership, and people are trying. Some people are trying. You can live in the house and still somebody else can own portions of it. You know, it's like, you know, in the way of, I'm going to pour all my money into this home and then own it and live in it. It's a, you know, compared to the stock market, compared to other ownership models where, because people don't just live in homes, they more and more increasingly, people see them as investments, as investment vehicles and so on. Right. So you could design an economic model that will be significantly different. Now, the problem is that everything from construction to selling homes is extremely conservative. Like the technology that was built, that built this house where I am here, is probably around for 50 years, and people build them the same way, because if you build it a different way, people might not buy it, right? But you could design an economic model that's different. Somebody will.
Just to go to the other extreme, and Ron heard me talk about this, or anybody, because I was reading this book and I was so fascinated about it. It's called Radical Markets. You could imagine this is sort of the future that potentially Vanja is laying out if you go to the extreme, a world where ownership is completely, doesn't exist the way it does today, and everything, especially real estate, is for sale always. So imagine I want to build a supersonic train, and I look on my app, let's say it's Cherre, it's kind of the future of Cherre as well, and I can see, okay, I need these parcels, and I can just click and buy those parcels, right? Because if I own something, I have to say it costs this much, I pay property taxes on it, and anybody can buy it at any time, right? That's one of the futures that people are exploring, where you take kind of the auction model to the extreme. Airbnb is almost one step in that direction of you own your place, but you're also renting out to someone else. This would kind of be designing the radical market, as they call it.
Yeah, and I think, by the way, I don't disagree with the fact that there's other designs of the market. And so my point was, this is Compass's strategy, right? You know, Compass's strategy is to particularly optimize the traditional existing market. There's other markets, right? I mean, we already have some of these things. I mean, Airbnb has gone a long way already towards, sort of taking this part of the world. But we have other examples as well, right? The iBuyers, which unfortunately COVID was the risk that people were warning for the iBuyer model. For those of you who don't know, the iBuyer are systems that where a company just buys homes and then worries about selling them later. And that's helpful for people who don't want the hassle of having to sell their house, or they want to buy another one. They need the capital from the sale of their house in order to put the down payment on the new house. There's various situations where this is a viable thing. I'm not going to talk much about iBuyers, but this is another option for a kind of an instant marketplace for selling your home. There's another question about how the world do they end up selling all those homes, and a big, of course, the risk, because it's a huge capital investment that you need, right? But there's others as well. I mean, timeshares have been around forever, and timeshares are kind of like a peak, a poor peak at that future, right? You know, I mean, people who own a property and they own a share of the property, and then they get some fractional use of the property, right? I happen to own, I own 2 homes. One that I can't go to now because it's in southern France and I'm not allowed to go. But that would be a home that would be an option to like Airbnb it, right? Turns out I'm not a huge fan of that, just because I don't like people in my house. But that's a perfect option for that. But my other place is actually a co-op. Right. For those of you who don't live in New York, you may never have heard of a co-op. What do? We, as the co-op board, it's a company that owns the building essentially. And then we have shares in the company, which then allow us to live in our apartments, right? And so again, it's just another piece of these. And these are all like kind of lame versions of that future that kind of have like worked in little niches, right?
Yeah.
You know.
We'll talk to you about this home you have in France, and we'll get it listed as, right after this tutorial. If anybody's interested, I'll send the link out. In the meantime, yeah.
And France wants you to pay all sorts of crazy taxes if I just rent it out a few weeks a year to people.
I think that this economy might actually become a reality soon, but there is one prerequisite for that, is the democratization of the knowledge. When you know what you're investing in, then you can invest in many other things like that. In real estate, you just don't have that knowledge. You really need to do a lot of research, a lot of legwork to actually kind of be sure in whatever you're investing. So it might work if you want to buy a house and rent it out. But if you want to be part of 100 houses or 1,000 houses that are all rented, it would be very risky because you have no idea what you're investing in. So there is a model of REITs, for example. Those are publicly traded companies that own real estate. So you can invest in a REIT and it just be on the stock market pretty much. The problem is that you don't even, as an investor in a REIT, you don't really know what they own and how well their real estate is doing. They are not, even being a publicly traded company, they're not obligated to release this type of information. So you're again in the void. You just don't know for sure what you're doing. If this knowledge becomes available for masses, for people, then out of the sudden people are going to be much freer in making real estate investments. I'll own 2% of this house and 3% of that house, something like that. But we need to have this knowledge available.
As this
knowledge
becomes,
go ahead, Ollie.
As this knowledge becomes more available, I'm just curious, Foster, this is for you. What about the 6% commission? I feel like as this data becomes, more and more democratized,
right? So
it seems some directions of Redfin and whatnot to.
Are you in the market, Ellie?
I was, but I saw not anymore. Decided not to.
Right. So, first of all, I think we're in the residential real estate. We're already seeing some of this. I mean, Zillow. Zillow's a pioneer with putting data out there that wasn't available before. For example, estimations of the value of homes, right? Agents hate that. But agents hating that
really well. Those estimations are not really good, honestly.
I'm not going to make a call on whether Zillow's estimations are good or not. Ron can tell us that they're not, but I'm not going to make a call on that. But the thing is that let's just say that they're as good as can be done. The fact is that they're estimations. there's gonna be some distribution of errors around the estimates. And so what are the agents, even if they were pretty good, right? And I'm not saying they're not, even if they were, some of them are going to be erroneous, right? And the problem is the pricing discussion is now anchored from what's seen on Zillow, right? You know, and so it's a lot more work now. The kind of thing that I was talking about in my session earlier, these comps, the analysis and stuff are actually much more critical now, right? Because people are anchored for whatever Zillow's models happen to give, you know, as the estimate, right? And yeah, but on the other hand, previously, you didn't know anything. You had to talk to your neighbors about where, you know, who sold their house. Oh, the person sold their house down the street. But that house isn't anything like ours. Yeah, but they got whatever for it or something like that. So we're already seeing the sort of democratization of, in this case, of inferences and of data, because it used to be only the agents could search the MLSs and find out even what houses were out there. Right? Now you have Zillow's site, you have Compass's site, you have Redfin's site, you have Street Easy in New York, which is a Zillow site, right? You know, and you can find out all manner of stuff, you know. And so to the question on 6% commissions, I don't know. I just was working this past week with my mom. I think I mentioned this earlier. She's selling my uncle's house who died earlier this year. And so, I don't know if you all know, homes are essentially free in Pittsburgh. And so my mother lives south of, in southwestern Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh. Yeah, you just go there and they give you homes. It's amazing. So seriously, so my uncle has this really very nice home. It's kind of unique because it has a garage, but then it has a truck garage. And so being in like southwestern Pennsylvania and having a separate truck or super high with the super high ceilings with an exhaust fan in it. So, you know, cool house, you know, on the market for 150 grand. Right. And so I went and I'm like, you know, should she be negotiating the, you know, the commission with her agent? And then I'm like, you know, agent's getting $4,500 out of this thing. You know, I mean, look at all this work she's going to actually do, you know, for my mom, you know. So my feeling is that, and by the way, and if it gets to be like, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, high end in New York, again, the agents do a tremendous amount of work because you have a lot of unique properties and unique buyers. Right. And so at least at the ends of the spectrum, it seems to me like, you know, the agents are earning something, whether the amount that my feeling was in Pittsburgh that the amount that she's earning for doing this seemed appropriate for the amount of work that she was doing. Right. Yeah. And so if that's the case, you know, maybe agents become Uber drivers and actually just don't earn what they really ought to be earning. We'll see. I don't think it's happening in the next 5 years.
You know, we were in the market 20 years back with my wife, and you know, being kind of new in the US, you know, just culturally this tax of 6% just felt amazingly high, honestly. And so, you know, so that kind of, but even at that time, you know, with the internet coming up, and the internet had this multiple promises in many different domains that turned to be the opposite, right? I mean, I thought that agents will be gone within 5 years in 2000. I also thought that mystery will be gone from the world because the truth will propagate through this medium very quickly, right? So I think to some extent, I think what's happening, or this is a hypothesis, what might be happening is with all this information and data being available, you actually have bigger need for somebody to curate and help you through it.
Yeah. Than
you had before when you had no virtual data. You need somebody to help you with no data. So maybe the agents are solving a different type of a problem than 20 years back, and that's why they're still relevant. I will just mention one thing. I think one of the things that I, again, as a learning experience at the Airbnb, I never understood the difficulty of dealing with properties is that they're not fungible. They're very different. It's like, even for Airbnb, some people need a pool. and others, and would not take a property without a pool, for example, especially now if you're sitting at home and in the house with small children and you need, you know, some kind of a entertainment. So houses without a pool are just not, you know, apply to you. And I think the key for any analysis of supply is really, really hard, because there's some very specific preferences on the consumer side that is just impossible to factor in out and say, hey, we need more supply in this area, because it's really, really hard to deal with such a heterogeneous supply.
And let me actually point something out that comes up from that comment. So in part because of this, and also, and secondly, because the decision is made so infrequently for most residential home buyers, right? But I think also in the Airbnb case as well, we have the following phenomenon. So I've seen lots of people come into real estate and they're like, well, the search problem. I know about search problems. I worked at Google or I worked at Amazon, right? And people are searching all the time, and we do all this AI, and we help, you know, the thing is that although we call it search, that's not what it is, right? You know, it's for most people, it's a process of exploration and discovery that is facilitated by a thing that looks like a search engine, right? But it's not that you go in with a specific information need, or you go in with a specific product that you're going to look for, at least product need. And I'm going to compare several different razors, because obviously I don't have one, you know, and I want to find the one that's right for me, right? No, you know, I think I'm betting, because I don't know Airbnb so much, I'm betting finding the right vacation home for you and like finding the right house for you are very similar. Whereas you go in and part of what you're doing is engaging in a process of self-discovery.
Yep.
Like, what would I really like? Where would I really like, you know, I need to move for my job, you know, to Seattle, you know? Yeah, I've been there. My sister used to live there. My brother used to live there, but I don't have any idea where in Seattle I would want to live. How could I possibly know that?
Yep.
Right. So I have to sort of engage in a process of discovery, you know, and agents, the buyer's agents helped people with that, right? They talked about all the different things. They talked to you about what's important to you. Is commuting, is, you know, public transportation, is having coffee shops, is, you know, you have hobbies, you go to the gym, you have a dog, you know, you have to visit your in-laws, you know, what are all the things that are important to you? And I'll help you to figure that out, right? And so this is all stuff, I think, that once we get the data into systems, we can build intelligent agents, you know. And so in the long run, it may be that a lot of the agents functionality is going to change. But I'm kind of with Vanja on, yeah, we kind of thought that we were going to be able to reach all this information technology was going to get us to the truth more efficiently as well. So
yeah, there's two things that are come to mind. One is just like interesting juxtaposition between that not happening in real estate, but it happening quite a bit in finance. And I think we're getting at, you know, what some of the differences are. The other thing that I was just thinking about when you were talking about search, I think one thing that's interesting with real estate is also, do you take the perspective of, are you optimizing for you know, your one client or your one guest, or for the marketplace as a whole, right? Because getting back to the original point that I made earlier, once a house or a listing or a piece of real estate is off the market, it's not there anymore, and you can't give it to someone else. So there's some really interesting like efficiency allocation questions of how to match best.
yeah, so as Vanja wrote in the chat, we're got about 15 minutes left. Audience, you have 2 T's. I don't know how much you're getting tutored. You're the audience. What you have questions that you want to raise?
Yeah, I mean, there is one. The first question is,
one's up. Yeah.
You know, on the intersection of DS and economics, I've been thinking about the scrutiny that the big tech is getting from Congress. There are implications for DS leadership about types of projects we invest in. How is your ROI calculation impacting staffing, data science, and competitive pricing? So this is a very, very good question. And I think, look, companies like Airbnb and Compass and Cherre is, and to some extent, much more connected to the real world again than the traditional internet company. I mean, there is there as well, and companies, as they grow and become bigger, they impact the world as like a gravity pull, and you change it in the way that sometimes you don't intend to. And so every company that starts growing like that has to decide on the amount and the moral compass of the company, so to say, and how to complement the business activities with that moral compass. And so I think, you know, Google had do no evil, and, you know, other companies had other kind of ways. At Airbnb is, we call it being a 21st century company. And this has a set of principles that, first, we believe that we serve not only the company, the employees, the shareholders, but what we call a community is a much wider, including the communities where these homes are and communities of the people who are traveling. So we assume that our goal is to foster, you know, to improve the lives of a much wider scope, which basically encompasses the world's population. And so this type of questions come honestly on a regular basis. And on a regular basis, we need to understand the impact of a company in individual communities. And we strive to get better and better in this. And we have invested significant data science resources into this, and then counter some of the potentially negative effects that we have. So it's a great question. It's something that's a daily basis for us in terms of understanding and making sure that we do good in the world.
If I can add just two quick observations. One, because real estate, you know, is a bit late as compared to finance and telecom and advertising and so on, to the like broad use of machine learning and other data science methods, we do get the advantage of seeing the mistakes that have been made. We have learnings on like transparency and fairness and, you know, other ethical issues of modeling that we can actually start to draw on. And the second is, we also are already bound by various business ethics principles like fair housing and so on, right? And so we're also starting off in a position where we already have to think about that, even if we hadn't had the lessons from you know, from other companies. I'm not saying that means every real estate data science company is like the most ethical company in the world. I don't know about what every real estate company is doing, but I think there are these threads that actually give some building blocks, right? So hopefully we if we're going to make mistakes, we make new ones, not the same ones over again. There's another question from Michael, which is maybe Ron knows about this.
Yeah.
Is automated valuation used in financial analysis, or is it more to support an investment decision?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, especially in the commercial real estate domain. So there are two aspects of a commercial real estate investor that one is acquisitions usually, and another one is asset management. So they actually need to understand how well their assets are doing. And that's a constant, like, you know, monitoring, and they cannot just like leave their portfolio and just hope that this portfolio is going to be making money. That's never happening. So they are constantly involved in this financial analysis of their own portfolio. And obviously the changes in the price that can happen independently on how well they're managing their portfolio. It can be some change that happened to the neighborhood, or some macroeconomic change that is happening right now, for example. Asset management has to take all those factors into account. And obviously, valuations are being used in this domain. But honestly, there's, again, a very big opportunity here that it's not done well from the data science perspective. So those are analysts that are sitting with spreadsheets and try to analyze what they have on their spreadsheets. I mean, it's valuable, but it's not enough. And it's an opportunity for us, for data scientists, to jump in and help investors with their asset management.
All right. Any other questions? Anybody wants to do a live and sound question?
Yeah, I would love to ask a question. I just want to check that you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. My name is Rohan. I've been asking the questions in the chat, but I figured out that my mic works. So this question may be misguided because I'm not super familiar with real estate. I'm just like a data scientist who would also like to own a house eventually. And I think this conversation has been awesome and delivered on much more. But it seems like there's a theme of kind of like information asymmetry. I think that's one of the things that you touched on in this panel. But then at the same time, as data scientists, like we always have these kind of idealized data sets in our mind, and like we want tons of information so that we can somehow model all of it and then establish these great connections, maybe in terms of pricing or something else. Could you talk a bit more about like the information that I guess you don't have access to that you wish you did, and how you're solving for that, and how it impacts what you can do with data science in real estate?
I can certainly speak about that. I mean, for for modeling who's likely to sell, which again, we can talk. I don't have time to really talk about all the applications. You can read about them. But well, the drivers of selling are largely things that we don't really observe. You might be able to do things like go out and crawl LinkedIn and stuff like that and find out whether people change jobs, where crawl Facebook, see whether people seem to have gotten a divorce, like all these different things that and so what do you you can buy third-party data that actually gets at some of these things. You can and then the from the machine learning point of view, which is actually one of the things that really fascinates me, is there's this idea, this phenomenon that has struck me over and over again, and it still strikes me even though I've been doing this for 30 years, and that is the AI models that come out of the machine learning, they don't think the way people do, right? If there's some way to proxy for something and you got good enough reasonable training data, they'll figure it out. So the agent will want to basically say, well, we don't know whether or not that person actually had a kid, and so I don't believe that whether they're likely to sell their house, right? And the machine learning model says, well, in that neighborhood, people actually live in their houses for 5 years, and then by and large, they go and they move out to a better school district. So they buy it. It's small houses. They buy it when they're a young family. They have kids. They live there. And if you by and large, after 5 years, and so we're just estimating the likelihood of things, right? Guess what? We can do that. And so I think there's a lot of this, what can proxy for what? And of course, we try to get more and more data all the time, but you also have to be thinking about what can proxy for what. Same thing with like valuation. You may not know some really super cool aspect of a home that increases its value, but you can go back to its prior transactions and see how its value in all its prior transactions stacked up against what you would have expected it to be at that time, and possibly infer there must be something. I don't know what it is, but there must be something about that house, because every time it's sold for more than what you would expect a house with those features to actually sell for. And so this is, again, another one of these things. Like if we're doing estimations, let's embrace the fact that they're estimations, right? And not feel like we have to know everything perfectly in order to make an estimation. No, we dig into that. So that's kind of my 2 cents on the matter.
Yeah, building on that example at Airbnb would be we give price suggestions to hosts, right? And so ideally we would know if they price differently, what would happen, but we don't actually observe all those counterfactuals. That would be something that ideally we would know. If you set this price, what happens? If you set this price, what happens? If you set that price, what happens? So it's inferring, it's proxying, it's looking at other listings, very much what Foster talked about.
In the commercial sector, it's even funnier. The data is available in big quantities, all types of data. the trouble is that it's like 50 different vendors, and all of them are providing data in different formats. And before we integrate them together, like a customer just cannot understand what is going on. And even more so, the customer gets kind of tired. And like, now I need to look at this data and that data and this data and that data and this. So they're just making a decision. And since the decision is not made based on the full picture, they actually are losing a lot of money. Like, and we are talking about millions and millions of dollars. So this is something that we need to change, even despite the fact that the investors and the owners don't really want to look into that data. They're too tired. They're not really technical. We don't want them to lose money only based on the fact that they didn't want to look at this data. So we need to build a model that is helping for them to do the right, to make the right choice, even despite the fact that they are not technical enough to process all those data feeds. So this is what we are doing here as data scientists in the real estate domain. I think it's time for us to wrap up, right?
Thank you all for your attention. I hope it was valuable for you. Thank you to my co-teachers.
Thank you.
Great chatting with you guys.
Yeah, likewise, as always.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks for doing it.
Enjoy the conference.
Thanks.